I'm interviewing Mr. John Cole at his home in Box Hill. It's the 6th of September 1984, a Thursday. To begin with, I'd like to ask about your background in Malta, if I may. When were you born and in what part of Malta?
Well, I was born in Paola, Castle Paola, the city of Paola in Malta, and on the 3rd of June 1915. And I was brought up in Malta.
And you told me something about your family. Was it a large family? What did your
Oh yes,
parents
I
do?
was. My father was an engine room artificer in the Navy. He lost his life during the war. He went down. They were torpedoed when the Medway was when they were evacuating Egypt during the Rommel advance, and he was in HMS Medway, and it was torpedoed, and he lost his life then. We are one of six children.
What
No,
occupation?
7 children actually, 2 girls and 5 boys. I started life as a teacher in the government schools there. Then I got into the expense accounts department of His Majesty's Dockyard. And from then on I entered politics. I entered the trade union field by filling the post which Reggie Miller had vacated to organize the General Workers Union, and I became branch secretary of the Admiralty branch of the Civil Service Clerical Association in the Dockyard. Then I organized the Malta Prospective Emigrants organization, and from then on, it was politics because I was asked to stand for elections, the first self-government, in Malta, when it was introduced in 1947, and I was elected, and I remained there until the day I came out here recently in 1958.
You held the post of Minister for Immigration.
Minister of Immigration, then Minister of Immigration and Labour, and then eventually Minister of Posts and Agriculture and Telephones.
I'd like now to deal with the period before the Second World War, if you were able to help me at all. For example, was there much discussion of emigration in Malta?
Before the war, emigration was not, as I told you, a subject which was very much discussed or bandied about. It was used only as a palliative, to give scope for those who did not have a job or wanted to improve themselves to leave the island. And again, it was not organized at all. The government only tried to find ways and means, how to, find receiving countries for the people who wanted to leave and assist them up to that extent only. But then it was up to them to find the, shipping, book their passages, and settle wherever they were going to settle, But it wasn't organized at all. Let's put it that way. It was just a movement, normal movement, which covered only between 600 a year, not more than 600, 700 a year.
From your own experience in Malta, did you know of people before the war, friends or neighbours, family perhaps?
No, because before the Great War, no, I don't know many people who left. From my immediate friends or family's friends, I don't know of many who emigrated. It wasn't such a widely, known subject at the time. It wasn't given much attention by anybody. It was a sort of an individual decision by somebody to go to America or go to Australia. Strictly speaking, migration to Australia was more from the rural areas, not from the industrial areas. And people who left from the industrial areas, from the city where I was born and where I was brought up, generally went to America, either to America or to the United Kingdom. And that was, only a trickle, not anything that could draw the attention of of anybody. It's just a movement.
Were the emigrants in that period from particular parts of Malta? You mentioned earlier.
There was the majority of migrants that came to Australia were from places like Mosta, Gozo, Melihang, the rural parts of the island. Other people from the industrial areas, like Faula, Cospigua, and these other cities, around the dockyard. Some came to Australia, but mainly the movement from there was to the United Kingdom and to America, to the United States of America. As a matter of fact, our communities in America were built mainly in those periods. Our communities in America. There's quite a considerable Maltese community in the United States, New York, Detroit, and San Francisco, and you'll find that many of those families left Malta before the World War.
And regarding the image of Australia in Malta, again in the pre-war period, how would Maltese people have regarded Australia? What would
they would have regarded Australia as a place where they could come and find a job and perhaps some stability, but you'll find that those communities mainly went to Mackay and the north, cane cutting and market gardening, and even on the wharves. At that time, obviously, as you know, at that time Australia wasn't much of an industrialized country itself. So even people who came to Melbourne and Sydney, they didn't have the scope from an industrial, from a secondary industry point of view as they have now. Australia, the picture of Australia at the time was the picture of a rural country, of, primary produce.
What were the main sources of information?
In those days? Oh, I suppose the only sources of information were dispatches and talks every now and then from the various representatives we had out here, who were not very many before the war, but still, that's the only information. There wasn't really any source of information about Australia, let's put it there, except the information that came from families to their relatives out there.
When you mention talks by former representatives, do you mean when they returned?
When they returned to Malta, once every 2 years or whatever it was, they used to, to give interviews to correspondents, paper correspondents, or this sort of thing,
So
But nothing of an organized nature. Nothing of a planned or organized nature.
In your own case, do you recall when you first heard of Australia?
I first heard of Australia after the war, when the war ended. When the war ended in Malta, everybody was aware that the future was a bit precarious. See, during the war, people, of course, there was shortage of food and shortage of everything for everyone, but everybody had a job. There was conscription too. People were in the army. People worked for the army, as civilians, and for the navy, for the dockyard. Dockyard employed, I believe, at that time about 18 to 19,000. Now, in a country like Malta, with its population being a third of a million now, anyway, at that time, that meant quite a proportion because every one of them had a family. And, that is the situation. And in that situation, quite a fair proportion of the population, and that includes, the various traits of the population, whether you were a tradesman or a white-collar worker, or whether it is, realized that the future it doesn't hold much promise because jobs were going to be, very scarce. And decisions were made by people who were in full employment at the time to try and find a future somewhere else. And of course, there was a search as to where to find this future. And obviously, in this search, people started getting literature and trying to find out, what's going. And Australia presented itself as a very promising land. In addition, at that time, Australia was the only country in the British Commonwealth which had an organized immigration program. And the fact that it had an organized immigration program and that its Department of Information was sending a lot of information overseas about the country to enlighten prospective migrants, obviously that held sway on the minds of a lot of people.
Well, what year are you speaking of now? When you looked, say, Department of Information material?
After the war, Australia had a plan, an immigration plan,
yes,
with assisted passages. And that came to the knowledge of these people in Malta seeking a way out to a future. And that's how Australia became no more than any other country out there. Because it was the only country which was sort of advertising itself as a country prepared to receive migrants and to assist them and to be helpful. And therefore that created a sort of an aura around the name of Australia. People started to dig further to find out more. And the general trend became, well, let's go to Australia. Of the majority. Not everybody decided to come to Australia because some wanted to go to the United States, others wanted to go to Canada. But whilst Australia presented such a program, Canada did not have a program and was not even interested in accepting any Maltese initially. It only happened after I visited Canada when I was a minister that took place. And the United States, I think there was what they call the Macaron Act. Previously, Malta was part of the UK quota into America, and therefore it was practically limitless. But then after that act, the Macaron Act, the quota for the Maltese based on the Maltese community out there was not more than 100 a year. So whilst Australia was saying, we welcome you, we're prepared to help you to come and to help you to settle down, other countries were not. Therefore, that's why the popularity of Australia was such that the bulk of migrants came to Australia.
I suppose Maltese who were already settled here.
Yes. But we had the Maltese settled in America too.
Yes.
A lot of Maltese settled in America too, and yet there wasn't that move to go to America because of restrictions.
With Canada, I suppose climate may have been a consideration.
Yes, but with Canada, just like New Zealand at the time, Canada was not very interested in anybody if it wasn't a United Kingdom citizen or a citizen of another dominion. And it wasn't very interested in people from the Mediterranean either. In order to break into Canada, we had to, we had a lot of diplomatic work to do, right, and get the door open to Canada. But of course, in Canada, then you'll find that the conditions, climatic conditions, are different than they are in Australia. And in Australia, they're more, more in line with the Maltese climate than it is than the Maltese climate is with the Canadian climate.
Regarding, for a moment, again, the pre-war period, what were the procedures before the war from Malta's point of view? Were there health tests and language prerequisites for prospective emigrants, or was it more of a...
Well, I don't think that health tests were on the same level as they are today, because the movement was not so great, it was just a trickle, and people came out here nominated, And no, I don't think there was anything organized in that fashion in those days, before the war. It wasn't a migratory movement. It wasn't an organized movement at all. The government was only an intermediary in those days between the migrant and the government and the countries of where they were going.
Did you hear anything regarding the group of migrants who left Malta in 1916? I mean, I know you wouldn't have heard at the time, obviously, but later on, the Gange incident, you know, where they were turned away from Australia and sent to New Caledonia.
No, very vaguely, it's very vaguely. I can't talk with any authority because I've heard about it very vaguely.
And regarding post-war period, could you tell me about the Prospective Emigrants organisation in Malta and how it was set up, how it came about, what sort of support it had?
Well, in 45, 94, when the war ended, as I've told you before, there was a great surge of people wanting to leave the island. And at the time, there was the colonial administration, and obviously the people were not aware very much of what was going on in any government department. It wasn't unnecessary because it was not a government by the people, of the people, or for the people. It was government from the colonial office, sort of government by decree. And there was a certain, because of lack of information of what was going on, and because people were getting impatient and wanted to move, they had to move, and wanted to avail themselves of the facilities which countries like Australia were giving passenger assistance, and about which we were reading in the papers. We were reading in those days that thousands were leaving Europe for Australia assisted by the government, displaced persons, and we from Malta, George Cross Island, we want to leave and we can't to a British country, And then there was a lot of impatience. I happened to be one of those who wanted to leave. And again, I must emphasize the difference between previous migration movement and this one, because the majority of these people wanting to leave still had a job out there. And they wanted to leave because they wanted to have a future, not only for themselves, but for their families. I had a job, a good job, established job, pensionable, and yet I wanted to leave because I had a family.
What was your position again?
My position, I was in the expense accounts department in His Majesty's Dockyard, white collar worker, and I wanted to leave, which was, I had a comparatively good job, and that is the type, people, even tradesmen wanted to leave from the island because of the future, and obviously they were keen and wanted to know what was going on. And at a stage where we couldn't really get anything moving, we said the only way that it could be done was to organize ourselves and pressure the government to move and to let us know what's going on. And it being a colonial administration, no parliament of our own, the only way you could do it is to get together and form an organization. And under the auspices of the General Workers' Union, we organized the Malta Prospective Immigrants Organization, and its meetings were attended by thousands and hundreds, not just by a few.
I know
And
it's a long time ago now, but you recall when it was set up?
I've got some details somewhere. It would be in about 1946, 45, 46, end of 45, 46, just after the war ended.
While it was set up under the auspices of the Union, was it a bipartisan approach? Or?
Yeah, because it was under the auspices of the Union, but it not only bipartisan, but made it a point to present emigration as a national issue. Where all sections of the community would be behind it, because it was an essential part of the future of the island, and we succeeded in that. There was no partisanship at all. It was a matter which was being very carefully followed and backed by all the sections of the community. Of course, there was a section in the island which wasn't too keen on mass migration, not on migration, but on mass migration. But the bulk of the island realized that unless this happened within the next few years following the war, we were going to be in a very sorry position.
So there was an inaugural meeting, was it?
There was an appeal by me, I remember, on all the papers of all colors. And after that, people started pouring in, contacting me, so I called the meeting eventually, and the meeting was attended by hundreds. And that's how it was formed.
That was in Valletta?
In Valletta, yeah. That's how the organization was formed. And after that, it was run on a really organizational, it had a constitution on a real organizational basis, with executive meetings and general meetings, frequent general meetings to report back, meetings to have the backing of the masses, the prospective emigrant masses, on what we should demand, to know. And eventually it led to the government forming a standing emigration committee. With the official side and the MPEO representatives. And we were in with the government pushing things there and reporting back to the people. But of course, things were moving, were just all talk. The government, could only say, yes, we're doing this, yes, we're doing that, but the movement was not there.
This is still 46?
Still 46, just, the year 46. Eventually, in 47, the agreement was even signed with Australia, the Passage Assistance Agreement. It was signed by the representative of the Maltese government of those days, the colonial administration. The government was colonial administration, but I think it was Captain Kurmi representing the commissioner down here. The agreement was signed, but it wasn't implemented in any, in any real way.
So what were the demands of the platform of the MPEO?
Well, the demands of the platform of the MPEO were many, but based mainly on three things. First, movement. Let's get shipping, let's start moving. We've got too many migrants registered for immigration, want to go and they can't go. Second, movement with assistance. Assisted because assisted in any way, but by any means, by the Malta government, by the Australian government, and also facilities to have accommodations and systems whereby people who didn't have accommodation could find a way to Australia or to other countries. So, but the main purpose is movement and assistance to move, and preparation. You see, these are the three main points. The keenness to move, start moving, assistance, financial assistance, assistance in training. These are the main bases, and assistance in settlement, and finding means and finding openings overseas to draw more migrants, because there were thousands registered who didn't have even either a nomination or even the means, the money to pay for a passage.
So there was actually no Department of Immigration?
There was, the Department of Immigration did not exist. It was a section only of the Ministry of what they call the Department of Labour. There was, you see, under the colonial administration, there was a Department of Labour and Social Services. And it was run by a man sent by the Colonial Office. And the immigration section was just a small section within that department. Very small section.
What was the Colonial Office policy regarding immigration?
Well, their stated policy was always, yes, immigration, we've got to help and we've got to push it on. The will was there, but the flesh was weak, or the organization was weak.
I suppose they were concerned about funding as well.
Yes, of course, funding would have come into it, although later they funded, when we had self-government then, they funded the expenses for migration. They did then. Obviously, the whole obstacle to movement, there was that there wasn't anybody, any government, which has not to give account of itself to the people and is not going to have to go back to the people and report on its, on its progress and expect to be elected. Anybody who is not expected to be elected can run the country the way he wants to, That was the whole problem. It was the system of government. It was a government, by civil servants, by British civil servants. And they had no interest at all, and no push to report to the people or to show the people that they're doing anything.
So in effect, the British imperial domination, if you like, was
lazy in all. They was lazy in all matters. I say there was sluggishness in all departments, and these matters were, because it was governed by civil servants, by bureaucrats, purely by bureaucrats, not even with politicians on top of them, but it was just government by bureaucrats, who at 4 o'clock in the evening didn't care one iota, about what they did in the office.
What I was getting at, would the British government itself have felt, or the imperial government have felt, that it was in the interests of, let's say, the empire to have Maltese immigration?
Well, I don't think the British government ever looked at it in that way. At that moment, they needed, people to be in Malta just after the war, but I don't think they looked at it, in the way from an empire point of view. As a matter of fact, the British government gave us a lot of assistance after 1947 when when the so-called self-government came to the island, only on pressure from us. So if real pressure was put in by the colonial officials there, they might have got more help. But I don't think that they had made up their mind on any way, one way or the other, in those days. Probably they were waiting. They knew that they would have the constitution to Malta. Probably they were waiting until we took over.
So the Maltese Prospective Emigrants organisation was the main force.
Yeah, the main force, and it definitely prepared the background for a policy line to be taken by a government if it were Labour. Eventually it was Labour, right? And obviously it started applying that plan, which was formulated by, very democratically by the migrants themselves.
So how do you mean that? By what process did that occur?
The process is the large meetings, and we had a page on the torch, what Migrants Corner, right, on migration matters, on agreements, on what exists in other countries, letters from settlers in other countries, and it was informative from all point of view, informative both from the point of view of what exists in other countries, of what's being done in other countries, receiving countries, for other migrants from elsewhere, what were the conditions, everything, just a real informative page, and also held meetings. And whenever we could, we got speakers coming from people coming from other countries, receiving countries, to give their views of what exists there, what's going on there. Continuous communication with other governments too, and getting information what's going on. We got the press from the various receiving countries, various colors, various views of the press. We got cuttings in there, and we discussed them. And we sort of formed the opinion of these migrants on a certain line of action, both with regards to the receiving countries, both with regards to what should be done in Malta to accelerate this movement and to organize this movement. The whole basis of the thing was to have organized migration, not disorganized. And again, the basis of the whole concept was this, that was that up to the war, migration was a palliative, But before the war, after the war, it had to be in those conditions an organized remedy not a palliative.
Yes.
It had to be organized in such a way as it to be a remedy. And eventually, you know, when from 48 to 1955, as I told you, about 60,000 migrants were moved, all assisted and smoothly settling everywhere.
The organisation itself, did that, well, that would have ceased to exist in 1947?
No, it didn't immediately. I was the organizer of it. And then when I was elected, of course I had to resign as secretary, and another chap took over, a chap named Mitty, and I told him to keep it going because I wanted to, you know, have them in for consultation from time to time to keep the thing moving. But of course then it gradually died out because the government was doing everything the migrants wanted, and the movement was so fast that the members themselves were, you know, were decimated.
Did Mitzi come to Australia too, or did he emigrate eventually? So,
I don't know, to tell you the truth.
who were the founding members?
I was one, the original one. Then there was another friend of mine who was on the executive of the Labour Party, was Mike Police, and a chap named Patrick Gorry. These were the original three. And a chap named, there was Manuel Malia, he was an official of the General Workers Union. Took part in it, he's in America now. And one named Sila, who's in America.
What was his Christian name?
Sila Romeo, R-O-M-E-O. He's in America now. Now I'm a chap named Edward Micallef, he's in Australia. He came to Australia. These are the some of the main, of course there are some more, I can't record them immediately because I could find some record about it, but these were the main, the organizers.
One of them is in Australia.
No, not one of them, quite a number of them in Australia. There are Guts, Micallef, you know, there are quite a few of them are in Australia. I can't tell you offhand the names, recall the names, all the names, but these were the main, because what happened was this: I published an appeal on my own in the papers and all the press. And then people contacted me, and the first group that met elected an executive committee. And from there we proceeded on to organize the MPEO.
What was your official position?
Well, I was secretary then, secretary. You know, I was made secretary after we met.
What would you say were the highlights of the organisation's activities?
Oh, the organization activities were, as I told you, to prepare information, you know, for the migrants as to what to expect in other countries and what migration means. Get shipping, assist in paying the passages, and assist in the settlement of the migrants in the country of reception, and find openings for migrants who neither had the money to come or nominations from overseas countries, to find jobs, to have group nominations by employers. For example, in Australia, we succeeded after my visit here. We succeeded in getting the SCC and the Snow Mountain Project to nominate 100, you know, as a group. So the government itself or the employer himself provided accommodation plus work. And again, one of our problems too was that if migrants left the island, they were doing it not only for the benefit of their own families, but also they were helping Malta, because they were relieving Malta of the misery that would be created if everybody stayed there when unemployment started to swell.
Yes, earlier you mentioned some figures.
And therefore it was the responsibility, it was the duty of the people of Malta and the government of Malta, whichever it is, to assist these migrants. And one of the problems was that for example, that the movement of migrants involved a husband leaving his wife and family back in Malta for a period of 4 or 5 weeks until he got here and started earning money. And therefore, eventually, after, we even introduced a system of bonus payments, which was based on the minimum wage paid in Malta, plus the number of children the family had, which would cover the wife and family for the first 5 to 6 weeks after the migrant left, so that until he got settled in the country, in which he was going, and started earning money, at least for those first 6 weeks for the trip, his family was being fed out there, was being looked after.
That was, what, in 49? Or?
This was in 48, we started 48, 49, yeah, that we started it. We also eventually, in 49, introduced a system whereby we said anybody, there was a redundant labor in many departments, even in government service, and said anybody who wants to leave his job. This is to try and give an example to other employers too. Anybody who wants to leave his job, we know that by leaving, he's helping us too. He's helping the people who are left behind. And therefore he deserves a bonus. And we paid a gratuity, special gratuity to people leaving their job in government service, paying them a gratuity, because they decided to leave and go overseas.
They would soon get a job on arrival in Australia.
Yes, at that time, yes. There was, they used to get a job immediately when they get here. These were all plans which were implemented by the first Labour government when I was Minister of Emigration, and based on what the MPEO had been asking for.
Yes. So the MPEO was like in a sense, a shadow ministry.
It was a sort of shadow immigration ministry.
And the platform was immediately taken
because
up.
This Ministry of Immigration in Malta was the first time we had it in Malta. The immigration was always a section in the Department of Labour, a small section of 2 or 3 employees in the Department of Labour.
What about the opposition party? Were they supportive of
the opposition party, the leadership of the opposition party, were against this movement. Because they maintained, you see, the opposition party was led by a man who was, and I'm neither condemning or anything, but he was pro-Italian, and then before the war he was pro-Mussolini, and therefore he was, a subscriber to the idea that Malta was the irredenta, a territory which was not redeemed by the Italians. It was their territory, and in his fanaticism on the subject, he thought that this migration movement was an idea concocted by the imperial government, right, to depopulate the island and fill it instead with English people coming to the island. He went to that extreme.
That was on
That was Mizzi, Enrico Mizzi. But the vast majority of the people, even members of the Malta Prospective Emigrants organization and people registered, were nationalists. Quite a good number of them, which means, therefore, that the only opposition we had there was from the top. But otherwise, it was generally accepted by every class, every section of the Maltese, official, unofficial, semi-official, everybody accepted it. Because in the Malta Prospective Immigrants Organization, we made it a point even before the elections of 1947, self-government, elections for self-government, we made to publicize it, publicize the whole concept, and everybody joined in the chorus. And we had the support of the whole community in the island, all the sections on this migration problem.
I was going to ask about the church.
The church was completely behind it.
Was at all levels of the church?
At all levels of the church, 100%. 100%.
What about the membership of the organisation? Was there an official or formalised membership?
Yes, there was a membership card out of the MPEO, yeah.
And do you have any figures
But of course,
on the membership?
no, I can't give you offhand, not offhand. But the point is that in these matters, the membership is an insignificant part of this whole organization, because all at meetings, at general meetings, we used to, not only members, everybody was invited. You know, when we held mass meetings, there were mass meetings, real mass meetings. They used to be advertised in the papers and on the rediffusion system there, and that's, you know, they used to be attended. We did not limit our meetings. We did not limit our meetings to just members. The MPEO stood there for every single registered prospective migrant.
And you'd have hundreds of these meetings.
Oh yeah, very frequently reporting back, you know, and saying something which raised the back of the colonial administration. You know, there was a hullabaloo, answer and charge on papers and all that sort of thing. Then the Standing Emigration Committee was set up by the colonial administration and brought in the MPEO, you know, on this committee.
As a consultative body?
As a consultative body, and we used to reach decisions of what the government should do. Whether the government did it or not, then that was another matter, because that was dictated by the colonial office. It was to be done. But that is where the whole program, which was implemented in 1947, the chartering of boats, chartering of space on ships, these were all matters which were raised, you know, with the colonial administration. There was no move. Then the biggest part of the movement started in 48, when I decided that the only way we can open up these gates for us was by going personally to the various receiving countries. And in 48, I went, you know, took us in 90 days like Jules Verne trip. I went to the United Kingdom to talk with the government there for financial assistance and shipping. Financial assistance was forthcoming because eventually they started paying a lot of money to assist the migrants. I went to Canada, and we opened up Canada after that trip. Went to the United States, and we got from the United States immediately a consul to come to Malta to process hundreds of visas which were waiting there for years. And then I came to Australia, and immediately in Australia we opened up, we implemented, I got the sanction from Cornwall to implement the Passenger Assistance Agreement. And, you know, that started the real movement. And we also, the government of Malta, with the assistance then of the British government, you know, very good financial assistance, we started, as I told you, paying passenger assistance to everybody, going anywhere. With Australia, they had the passenger assistance agreement where Australia, you know, provided $30 in support of every passage. And in their system, that was based on the fact that the sending country, Malta, pays another $30, and the migrant pays $10, because the average passage cost from Britain was $70. But that was the case from Britain. But the shipping we were getting from Europe was costing more than $100 a passage. So we decided that we should make the migrant pay still $10. $30 are provided by the Australian government. The balance, whether it's 100 to 100 or 110, whatever they costed, but it was to be paid by the Maltese government. So every migrant pays $10 for his passage. And in connection with Canada, where there's no passenger assistance scheme, or anybody wanted to go to England or anywhere, we provided up to 75% of the Malta government alone provided 75% of the cost of the passage to everywhere, to anywhere.
What would have been the main source of revenue for the Maltese government in this period?
Well, at that time it was the revenue raised locally, but we had from year to year, we discussed with Britain the amount of money which Britain was due to pay us, you know, to balance our budget. Because don't forget that Britain was using Malta as a fortress.
Oh, yes.
And therefore, that was a right that we should get as much as we can to support our budget. But with regard to migration, especially after Sir George Schuster's report, we got, we could get whatever we wanted on migration. The problem was appreciated, as I told you, the problem was appreciated by the whole island. It was a unanimous, more or less unanimous feeling and unanimous desire to press with migration and to assist migrants. And there was a general appreciation also, which is a very good thing, and I used to admire it a lot. There was a general appreciation that when migrants left, they did not that only, it wasn't something which was going to be good for them only, but they were paying a price also because, they were making Malta a better place for those who stayed.
Yes.
And therefore, those who stayed had to be part of it and thank them for it. As a matter of fact, eventually, I started also when big shipments were leaving, I organized also a sort of a public attendance at the wharves, and with the police band playing, the army band playing, and all the representatives of the various, the church, the bishop, the prime minister, ministers, and everybody coming down there to bid them farewell before the ship left. Arranged with the forces, to send wireless messages when a lot of boats following them out of the breakwater, to cheer them up. Thousands of people down there going with them, not the families only, but the whole, cross section of the population. It was an occasion when the ship left.
Give me a minute, I'll turn the tape
Yeah,
over.
yeah. We used to arrange with the services also there for a signal to be sent to the ship when it's miles out at sea. Here is our farewell again from the government and people of Malta. Good luck, sort of another message whilst they already out at sea, because boats used to accompany them to a certain distance. Now when boats started coming back then and the ship, went on its way, then we used to send them, the services facilities of radio wireless facilities, and send the message to the ship to be broadcast to the people as the final goodbye and thanks.
And most of these people, as you said earlier, had jobs in Malta.
Most of them had jobs before they left.
And that would have been as a result of the reconstruction.
Reconstruction, yes. And I still say that for those first thousands of people who left the island and the islanders themselves, then and now, have got to be thankful. They were, in my opinion, they were heroes. Those people who left the island at that time. And it was a matter of not just themselves, but a self-sacrifice too, because they helped the island. That's my opinion of them. Our history perhaps, going through the press and papers in those days, would realize that they were heroes.
And, before the 49 or 48 agreement, what was the situation regarding procedure for immigration, like for the individual who wanted to immigrate?
Well, it was a simple result that we used to go to the Department of Immigration, then come here and be received, up here without any preparation whatsoever beforehand. We did not have, as we had after the war, an Australian representative out there to process them.
Well, I was asking about that period, say 45 to 49.
45 to 49.
Yes.
You've got to divide between 45 and 47, and 49 when the Passage Assistance Agreement.
Yes.
They used to be processed by the department and papers sent to the Australian authorities.
See, there was no Australian.
No Australian. That came in 1947 when mass migration, when the Passage Assistance Agreement started being implemented, and we established in Malta a medical section ourselves to process these migrants, so that they won't be held up by the Australians. Then an Australian doctor together with the Australian officials used to come to Malta, and the Australian doctor used to work within the medical section of the Department of Emigration and sanction these, the various examinations. And the process was quick in that way.
And what about language tests? Did they come to?
Or just because there was no language, because anybody who presented himself to the migration officials, those people who were processed by the department, the Maltese department, were presented to Australian officials. The Australian officials either could assess very quickly, but there wasn't much. There wasn't much emphasis placed on language.
Regarding character, is there any character requirement?
Yeah, the character requirements were there, but that posed a problem at a stage. You see, during the war, because of emergency regulations, the defense regulations, and the shortage of food, if a man was caught with a can of corned beef after a convoy, that meant imprisonment. So on the conduct sheet of these people, you find that he was imprisoned. And that was being used by some Australian officials to hold these people back. Then an explanation was made about this matter. And it was arranged that any offense, right, registered in connection with these things should not be considered at all. And unless it was a major criminal thing, that wouldn't stop anybody from being accepted to Australia, unless he was a criminal, real criminal. Because Malta, having been an island fortress, beleaguered and besieged, the defense regulations were very hard. Anybody caught pinching anything from a convoy which came in and with hardly enough stuff to go around, used to get a huge penalty in those days. But it doesn't mean that he was a criminal,
No. There was one thing I wanted to ask about specifically. I came across a newspaper clipping, I think it was in the Times, the London Times. It regarded, I think the person's name was Ray Farrugia.
Ray Farrugia, he was in the MPEO, that one.
He was the London representative.
Yeah, he was the London representative of the Malta Prospective Emigrants organisation.
This newspaper article was about, it was a report of Mr. Farrugia protesting to Australia House in London because apparently they had classified Maltese under the White Australia policy. It was an incident. I think Arthur Caldwell very quickly clarified it. And the heading was something like threat to charter boats.
But that would be before 1947.
Oh yes, 1946.
1946 was the colonial government.
Yes, yes.
Well, I can remember something like that, but of course the movement hadn't been organized by that time. As I told you, the colonial government. There was only a trickle coming in, and probably they were mixed with Italians or some other people, and there was some mistake made. But that was before 47, before the government took over.
Yes, definitely.
I recall something like that, but I can't offhand remember the details. I might have some documents about it, but offhand I can't remember the details, but I remember that something like that happened. But I think it was all in all a very, an odd situation, not a regular one. It was some incident.
Yeah, I
think just an incident.
It was the officials acting off their own background.
That's right.
Policy,
and if I'm remembering correctly, I'm hoping to correct you, I remember it was because they came in with a group of other migrants. They were only a small number of, quite a number of them, but they were in a ship that was coming with migrants from other countries in Southern Europe. Was it? I don't remember. I can't recall the incident in all its details.
The report said that Australia House in London had received so many thousand applications from people in Malta who were keen to go to Australia, and Australia House had turned them back on the grounds that under the White Australia policy, I know it's absurd, but under the White Australia policy the Maltese would be excluded. So Ray Farrugia kicked up a stink and said, well, we're British subjects and we're not subject to the White Australia policy.
Yeah, but this is what I mean. It was, I think, a case of not thousands of registering with Australia House in London, because they couldn't register with Australia House in London. They were registering in Malta. And what it dealt with was with Maltese who were in Britain and tried to register to go to Australia.
Oh, I see.
Not Maltese registering from Malta.
Oh,
It was, you know, a sort of a incident which, you know, which occurred, you know, just as an incident. But otherwise, you know, both Colwell and Holt after him, I think it was in 52, when there was a slump in Australian employment. I can check this for you later on if you want to. I think it was in 52. And Holt visited Malta, and we had, you know, talks with him. And he made a statement here in the House, and I've got that one, where he said, Malta is a special case. Their war record, something on this sort, their war record gives them the right to be treated as a special case, and they will not reduce the intake from the island. He who made that statement. No, he made that statement, I think, in the Citizenship Convention here, you know, the Citizenship Convention. Have you got that one? That speech?
no.
This was a time of recession out here. And obviously before him, Colwell was the man who started the passenger assistance agreement. As a matter of fact, I remember him, I was out here in December, and he told me in the end, he said, don't, because there was a complaint out here that we never spoke to the press. But that was deliberate. We kept away from the press, because Colwell told me, look, before you go, you take that as a Christmas present. You can start implementing the passenger assistance agreement and get going.
This was in December 48?
In December 48. In December 48, yeah. He opened the gates.
Well, I was going to ask about Colwell, of course.
Oh, Colwell helped us a lot. We opened the migration movement, as I told you, in 48 when I saw him, met him out here and had discussions.
How did you find him? What dealings did you have with him?
Well, we were on very, very great very good personal terms. I used to ring him on many occasions. I rang him from Malta on certain aspects of the things, and we settled things even on the phone.
I'd like to ask now about the shipping situation, which was a problem, I believe, for the Maltese emigrants.
Yes, it was a huge problem because, as you know, in those days, as a matter of fact, this was an argument put always by Maltese migrants. Once the colonial administration was lagging, was dragging its feet. Migration was in full swing from Europe, from the United Kingdom. Ex-servicemen wanting to come to Australia, especially. Northern Europe, the displaced persons organization, displaced persons being shifted to Australia. Southern Europeans coming to Australia on nominations and all that. And shipping, obviously, belonged to these nations. British shipping, Scandinavian shipping, Italian shipping, Greek shipping. They were filling up with their own migrants. We had no shipping ourselves. So we had to have to beg around. And the only way out of that was for us to try and start chartering sections of ships before they leave the country of origin. And it was quite a job to do that. And eventually, we chartered 2 full empty boats. The government chartered them, and the company which provided them carried out, refurbishment, on these ships in Malta dockyard to make them as fit as possible for Maltese migrants. But they were just cargo ships, and not passenger ships, but that's the last resort we had.
That was in 47.
That was in 48, 49. So because there was a backlog building up because of lack of shipping.
What were the names of those ships?
That was the Ocean Victory and the Ocean Triumph. They were not very good ships, but they were the only available ships with a British flag available to us at the time.
Which line owned
I can't tell you
Oh,
unless I make reference to some notes I might have.
it? No, don't worry.
I forgot which line it was. I know that they were bought for the purpose, refurbished in the dockyard in Malta. They were plying somewhere in the Middle East before that, and therefore they were rigged for passengers which are not of European standards. That's why they had to carry out a lot of work on them. Before we do them, we chartered them, and we just catered for a huge backlog that we had caused by this lack of shipping.
So what was the backlog, and how many were relieved by these?
Well, in that, with those ships, I think we succeeded in moving over 3,000 people within 4 weeks, one after the other. Within 4 to 6 weeks, if I remember correctly, but within a very short period, whatever it was, we succeeded in picking up a backlog of about 3,000 migrants.
What was the general waiting list?
Oh, the waiting list then was about, I should say, about 8,000.
The 3,000 who departed on the two vessels, were they covered by the assistant passenger group?
Yes, all of them, because we paid for the whole ship, we chartered it. So the Australian government paid its $30 per head, as usual, and the migrants paid the $10, and children less. Anyway, children under 14 nil, and up to 19 it was about $5, I think, up to 19 years of age, from 14 to 19, and under 14 was free. And we paid, the government of Malta paid the balance. But we had to send migrants at all costs because they were clamoring, they were waiting, they had been processed, ready to go. Some of them had already sold their furniture and no shipping could be found.
In the years, say, 1945 and 46 and 47, how would migrants have come from Malta in those years?
Oh, taking an odd ship, there was the P&O line before that. They take a passage just like any other passenger. There weren't many.
That would come from England?
Yeah, but from England there wasn't that movement. There wasn't that movement to Australia that there was after the war. Before the war, before 1947. During the war there was no movement at all.
Yes.
From anywhere. Now, before 1939, because that's the time you're referring to, before the beginning of the war.
Oh, no, I meant the period, well, the years 45, 46.
47, from 45, 46. Well, they couldn't move. We used to get about 100 birds, say, on the Asturias, a ship coming from Britain, just 100 birds.
It would almost be luck.
Be luck, that through a lot of pressures. We kept getting that through a lot of pressures, and I remember James Callaghan, he was in the Ministry of Transport in those days, before he came to the Prime Minister, and he helped a lot by allocating a certain number on every ship that left Britain.
For Malta.
I met him on my trip in 48. I went to London and had talks with him. We were very friendly with him, and he was in the Ministry of Transport, not the Colonial Office. And he succeeded in allocating a certain number of ships.
Was that as a result of representations?
Representations of talks, yes, by the government.
By the government.
This was in 47. We were in government. As I told you too, in 48, then in September, August, I left on a mission. Went to Britain, Canada, United States, and whilst in Britain, one of the things I tackled with the British government was finance and shipping. And from then on, we started getting a parcel on every British ship.
Tell me, with your visit to Australia, the mission to Australia, did you achieve what you set out to achieve?
Yes, I did, because I achieved two things. I achieved the implementation of the agreement, that number one. Number two, I achieved also after that what we used to call group nominations.
Yes.
You know, Snowy Mountain Project, Canberra projects in Canberra, and other projects around Australia used to nominate, say, 400, Maltese 500. And the representative of these authorities used to come to Malta, screen the blokes, and they used to come out here then having both accommodation and the job straight away. So instead of relying on accommodation by relatives, you know, it was group nomination by employers and government authorities, or semi-government authorities.
The Snowy Mountain people.
The Snowy Mountain, we had a lot of people working there, and the SEC too. In Victoria, you know, we had a lot of people sent to Kiva.
And I believe the South Australian Railways did a group
Yes, they did too. Yes, they did. But that's what that trip, the trip served three purposes. One is open up the migration, implementing the passage assistance agreement, establishing personal contact with the Australian government officials and the minister and all that, establishing that contact with various other, authorities here. And thirdly, this group nomination business.
Was there any resistance encountered in Australia from any quarter?
Not that I know of, no.
How did...
I think the Maltese were very well received everywhere.
Oh, yes. Especially after the war.
Yes.
War.
Yes.
And how would the reception you received from Arthur Calwell compare to the reception you received in the other places you visited?
Well, I got more out of Arthur Calwell than anybody else. The reception is excellent, very friendly, and this is what I expected. Because I knew, I was in correspondence with Calwell when I was in the MPEO. Of course, he couldn't do much because one government couldn't deal with an association from another country, it would deal with the other government. The other government was the colonial administration, right? But this is what I expected. I knew Calwell through correspondence, and then I met him personally. But in Canada, I had a very good reception, but it wasn't on the same ground as Australia. Australia was a working relationship. In Canada was just an initial relationship which led to work after that, led to the opening of migration to Canada. The United States was just a protocol reception, except for the fact that we got them to help us in shipping if they could. Eventually it didn't come to much. And I had some other missions to carry out in America, getting streptomycin, which was short. I can't go to everything offhand, because as you know, even dates out here I'm talking off my head, and this is so many years past. I've got documents I can refer to on these matters. But with regard to dates, I'm only approximating, And in Australia, of course, the biggest success was in Australia. Mind you, it was the most popular receiving country we had in the world. Everybody, was set for Australia. And again, this was caused by the fact that the Australian government and Calwell had a migration plan. Planned migration. Elsewhere, it wasn't planned, it was just, migration, immigration. But here, in Australia, there was a plan.
Do you think with Calwell personally, his religion, like the common religion, would have played a role, like the position of the church in his life and in Malta's life?
Not that it was, I don't think it was such an important aspect of this friendly relations. I think Calwell expressed his views also. I remember when I was on an occasional function in Canberra, that Australia, he, like the whole of Australia, had a lot of admiration for what Malta went through during the war. I think that was one of the bases
Yes.
of whatever was sort of arranged with Malta. In those days, just after the war, I think there was a lot of admiration for what we went through out there. I think that was the main basis of Colwell's attitude.
Yeah, I get that impression.
Yeah,
generally
that was
too.
the main basis.
But I believe there was an agreement after the war, or not an agreement, but an assistance scheme for United Kingdom and Allied ex-servicemen. It's in reference to this.
The scheme was the passage assistance scheme. No, I remember. They paid the full passage, isn't it?
This was immediately after the war.
Yeah, they paid the full passage in that one. I don't know, but I think they paid the full passage, isn't it?
I'm not sure, really, of the terms, but I've wondered.
You see...
Did it include Maltese ex-servicemen, being that they were allies?
Well, I'm not very clear on that, but I would think that did not apply in Malta. It applied, say, for servicemen who left from England.
It was called UK and Allied, and the Polish ex-servicemen came to Australia under that scheme. I thought, gee, I've seen no evidence that any Maltese came under it. Wondered why
I don't think it was applied in Malta. We had our own passage assistance agreement with the government here, which was equivalent to it, wasn't
Yes.
it? That might have been a provisional arrangement before Australia applied the various passage assistance agreements with the various countries, because eventually it applied also, Australia applied this passage assistance agreement even with Italy.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think that was probably was an immediate arrangement as part of the concept of the displaced persons movement.
I think it was 45.
45, yeah. Would be about 40, just at the end of the war.
And, on arrival in Australia, what would have been the main problems encountered by the immigrants in that time period?
Well, the first problem encountered in those days was their own self-accommodation, because they came nominated. They came to live with other families, and the first problem encountered was for them to have their own home. And again, one other problem initially used to be the question of sending money home, but then that was a bit softened by the government out there. We deciding to pay the wives for 6 weeks a certain bonus back in Malta. But obviously the main worry was that they were living with other people and finding a place of their own to send for their families. That was the main problem. Because as far as jobs are concerned, they found jobs.
In those days, there was a great labour shortage.
Yes, they found jobs, no doubt about that. There was a lot of movement. You see, at one stage, there were many complaints that because the Maltese were not tied down, labour was not much directed by the government as it was with Central European displaced persons and all the sort of people. They were British subjects and they could move wherever they wanted to. But there was a complaint that they were moving too fast from one job to the other. Leaving a job after 4 weeks to find another one somewhere else. They were complaining that once you get a few Maltese in, a lot of complaints were that they were leaving the job within a few weeks. Yeah, but the problem was at that time, was I'm telling you, that they were leaving one job to go to another because it followed their search as to where they were going to find their own home. You see, they were living with other people, and perhaps after 4 weeks with such relatives in an area, in the suburbs, they had to go and live with another relative to relieve them, you know, of after 4 weeks, things become getting, you know, a little bit in a house, you know, where you're living with somebody else, it's not easy. So after 4 weeks, perhaps that feeling of initial meetings, you know, goes off, wears off, you know, the welcome wears off a bit, and they have to go and live with some other relatives until they found their home. And therefore, all this flitting from one place to the other reflected itself on them getting a job here and leaving it after 3 weeks to go somewhere else.
Would they have had much support from a Maltese community here in those days? Were there organised communities?
Yeah, there was an organisation. I think Paul Paris at the time was at the head of it, but not to the extent that they've got today. Because this is one other aspect of the change we brought over from the MPEO on to the government when we took government, and that is to enlarge, you know, the reception side out here, and we included representatives here, more representatives, paying employees, paying people even for temporarily taking care of these people, you know, and we assisted the organization of the receiving end. But they didn't have that much, you know, but they used to go and meet them. Some used to go and meet, but there were not enough of them, obviously.
And was there an MPEO branch here, or representative here?
Not in that sense. We didn't have any money to have it anyway before when we took over government. Then we started arranging these various subsidies, you know, through subsidies, and various organizations. We used to subsidize them in order to go and receive the migrants and help them, you know, in settling down and going to wherever they have to go.
Before I forget, I must ask you to tell me on tape that story about your seat in Parliament in Canberra.
Yes, it was. I think you'll find it in Hansard here too. It was on the 5th of November, not the 5th of 1948. I had met Colwell and other representatives of the other parties at a lunch in Parliament House. I think there was Sinclair in it and Anthony. Looking back at the names, I can find, you know, that we met White from the Labour Party. He was Minister of Aviation, I think, at the time. Colwell was giving the party, you know, the lunch. Then after that, we went to the house, and after questions, I think it was Chifley, not sure who it was, Chifley or Colwell, asked the Speaker, who suspended the debate, to mention that I was in the House, and would the House give me permission to have a seat in the House. And I was given a seat by the Speaker in the House.
It's quite unprecedented.
It was unprecedented, and I don't think it ever happened again. That's why I told you our relations with the Australian government in those days was excellent. And it remained excellent anyway for quite some time.
And including under Holt, under the Liberal?
Under the Liberals, they carried on with Colwell's policy.
So, but it was a
I don't think there was. Well, I think in those days, immigration was bipartisan, and everybody admitted that Colwell was the father of immigration.
Yes, no doubt.
And mind you, even when I was out here, he made it a point that I'd meet the other parties. Colwell himself made that point, you know, that I meet with other parties as well. It was bipartisan, completely bipartisan. I think you should see, I have a copy of it somewhere. You see that part even in Holt's time, you know, that he carried on with the same opinion of Malta, you know, during that recession period. If I find it, I'll send it to you.
Thank you. I've exhausted my questions. If there's anything that you think I've overlooked or anything worth adding that I should include in my thesis or in the book, please say so.
Well, I can't see anything, you know, straight away.
But I'd like to correspond from time to
We'll
time.
do that, and even if you have any other questions, send in a note and I'll give you the information you want.
Well, thank you very much.
Mind you, there's one thing I want to apologize, because with regard, I'm talking just of my
Oh, yes. No,
memory
that's-
now, seconds of my memory, and the sequence might not be what it should be. I don't know, but I'm not referring to any documents that I have. If I go through, probably a lot of things would come out.
Well, thank you very much for this
I
interview.
might send you perhaps a sample copy of a letter sent to the colonial government by the MPEO, just to show you what we used to do.
Yes, yes.
We have a sample copy or something like that.
Yeah.
I'll go through the documents and see whether I can send you some of those things so that you appreciate what the MPEO meant. The Ministry of Emigration in Malta, after I was there, you see, I was a migrant, a prospective migrant. And I held there then because I had a challenge. And this came out in the press too. And I remember the Lieutenant Governor in Malta, when I was appointed minister, said, now what you used to charge us with, see whether you can do it yourself.
Right.
And I had that challenge. And therefore I implemented one way or the other everything that the MPEO is to put to the government. And I have to thank my colleagues then because they gave me a real free hand. Incidentally, eventually I got a free hand even from the British Colonial Office to ask money, in my plans for immigration. Because I had been in it, I had studied it, I had planned it, and my colleagues, gave me all the latitude. And I thank them for that.
Did any of the other leaders of the MPEO become
No,
senior officers?
no. I was the one that was elected, and I had a committee immediately organized as soon as I was elected with the MPEO representatives there. But gradually then it died out because what the MPEO wanted was being implemented.
Yes. Yeah, well, thanks very much, Mr. Colton, for this interview.
It was a pleasure.